Welcome to the ClearAdmit MBA Admissions Academy. I'm Graham Richmond and I'm with Alex Brown for this lesson on essays. It's the fifth essays lesson and this one is about popular questions. We're going to continue this discussion, Alex. We've talked about some other popular questions, but in this lesson, I want to focus on what I think are some of the harder popular questions. They include questions about change, so industry changes, questions about ethical dilemmas that people might encounter, as well as just open-ended questions. There are a lot of schools that have sort of an open-ended, tell us something about yourself, or a creative kind of, no real question, just share something you want your classmates to know kind of thing. So let's start with the essays about industry transformation and, why are schools asking about that kind of thing? Like, why do they wonder what your thoughts are on changes in industry or in the global kind of business world?
Yeah, I think these are challenging questions because, frankly, why are they asking these questions? I think it's a marketing PR exercise on part of the schools to sort of get you to think about this sort of, whether it's a climate change sort of related question or whatever it might be, because clearly if they're asking that question, then the candidates think, well, the school is thinking about this stuff, so it must be a good school and so on and so forth. So there's a little bit of, I have a little bit of cynicism for these types of questions because it really doesn't allow the candidate to showcase themselves as the other typical questions generally do, whether it's failures, mistakes, leadership opportunities and accomplishments. Now they're sort of creating some thought to an idea or an industry change or something like that. So they're going to have to, basically come across as someone that really understands the change. They got to do the research, make sure they resonate with the change and so on and so forth. But to me, it's a bit more of an academic exercise.
Yeah, and I will say that some of the schools that ask these kinds of questions will often say, oh, watch this video of, one of our professors talking, or our dean gave a speech, watch that, and then write about what you think the global pandemic has done to business, or, just different, and these change from year to year, but it's just, so you're right. I think some of it is marketing. They want you to get excited. Wow, that dean was really eloquent, or that professor's amazing. I would love to take a class with that professor, but that doesn't take away from the fact that you still have to write the thing. Yeah. And I think you're right. They're just looking for whether you can, show some knowledge and, ability to kind of understand the change that's taking place. And I think an openness to, learning more. So you could, and if you're smart, you might draw on some of the things that the school has on offer that could help you in this domain. So those are, fortunately, of the popular questions we're discussing in the Admissions Academy, those are far and fewer between, but they do come up. Yeah. So what about an ethical dilemma? We do see schools. One that comes to mind immediately is HEC in Paris. They have a kind of an ethical dilemma type question. So what is a school looking for there? Are they looking to see if you're ethical or not? Or is it more, why are they asking that kind of a question?
Well, it's a dilemma. So you need to make sure you come up with the situation that you were involved in where neither choice is necessarily the right choice, and you have to sort of go through the steps that you went through to make the particular choice and wrestle with the dilemma or whatever it might be. But you want to make sure that in this case that you actually find a proper real world example of which you were involved in, whether you actually instructed the choice or were part of the choice or at least familiar with what was going on. But it's challenging. Maybe there's a situation where you're working at a company and your company is looking at merging or buying another company, and maybe your company is all about sustainability and does some real good sustainability stuff in your industry, and this company doesn't, and there's some issues there, and should you go ahead with the merger or not, and how does all this work? It is what it is, but you've got to really, again, using the sort of the STAR method, really lay out the situation. What is the ethical dilemma that you all had to wrestle with? What was the decision that was made and why was it made? And so on and so forth.
Yeah, good advice. I think those are also challenging. Not everyone is faced with big time like ethical dilemmas, and so sometimes it takes a little bit of mining. And that's why, again, personal inventory, having that list of experiences, challenges that you've faced can be really useful here.
And again, it might come from that outside of work activity, that volunteer activity you're doing. Something like an ethical dilemma is more likely potentially to show up in that, in that regard.
Absolutely. So the other thing, though, that I wanted to talk about in this lesson are these open-ended or creative essays. Harvard Business School has an essay that's just sort of basically, tell us, we've gotten to know you via the application form and your resume. What else do you want us to know? So, and no word limit. So where do you go with that? And let's just start there. How do you tackle that kind of an open-ended, question?
You take Stanford's first essay and rewrite it. And you tell everyone what means most to you and why, because that's not on your resume.
Right.
I mean, I'm joking apart, right? But the point is, what does that essay do? It gives you a chance again to tell your story, because what you've done in the rest of the Harvard application is sort of, you've got your resume, your data points, and so on and so forth. But there's no real storytelling there. So it does give you a chance to sort of bring to life one or two of your accomplishments, something you're particularly proud, or there could be a myriad reasons why you select one or two things that you want to tackle in that story. But it does give you that sort of chance to control the narrative much more so.
Yeah, even though I set it up as though it's kind of a nightmarish, oh my gosh, they're not giving me any framework, I think it's a great opportunity. Like you say, shape the narrative. Obviously, if you're applying to Harvard, don't use the Stanford essay verbatim, because they'll recognize that immediately, right? But I do think it's a great opportunity for you to make your pitch in prose to the committee about what they need to know about you. That's not just right there on the resume or something. So agree there. What about the length on that one? Because I know people are right away wondering. I mean, I personally have this framework, which is, I know that most schools ask for anywhere from 1,000 to 2,000 words total across a set of essays if they have multiple essays. And so I have this framework in my mind that you probably don't want to go north of that when you're writing, even though Harvard would say there's no rule, but they're reading the most applications of any school. I believe they get the most, right? So what's your take on that? What would you recommend someone?
I mean, maybe 500 to 1,000 words is probably a good length. I mean, the key is just make sure everything you're writing is adding to the story. Yeah. So you just don't start repeating. I mean, just clearly, it might be 300 words, but it might be 7 or 8. Whatever it is, make sure everything you're writing adds to the story, and so forth. The other sort of wrinkle to that, is it Booth that doesn't give you a maximum but gives you a minimum?
That's correct.
So again, some of these different schools have slightly different rules on essay length, but the key, what drives the length, is make sure the content adds, each paragraph and so forth.
So the last thing are these creative questions where instead of it just being, tell us about yourself, it's tell us about yourself using 6 photographs or 6 images of your choosing from the web, or even a list of 25, kind of random things. So sometimes I think candidates really struggle with these types of questions. And I want to put out there that I think they're designed to allow the poets in the applicant pool to shine, because the quants in the pool, the people who are all these numbers people, often look at a question like that and get nervous, So what's what about these kind of creative questions?
Yeah. The way I look at those types of questions is, however you tackle those questions, I don't think it can derail your candidacy. But there will be a few answers to these questions that would be like, wow, this candidate is really interesting. So I guess my point is, I think these types of questions can elevate a candidacy, but not necessarily drop a candidacy down. Because at the end of the day, the substance of the application, the other essays, the data forms, the resume, and that's basically the bulk of what this candidate's truly about. If they're not overly creative, it's probably not going to be the kiss of death. But if their creativity really shines a spotlight on really shows actually there's an additional element to this candidacy that's not coming through in the rest of the application, it can really elevate. quite frankly, I don't like them because I know that I wouldn't be able to stand out through the creativity. So maybe I'm just sort of justifying that in my mind, but that's kind of always been my take.
So I actually like these essays because I think they give the opportunity to the, creative types to sort of shine, and in discussing them with folks at NYU that have an essay like that, or Duke Fuqua, they enjoy reading them too. It's a little bit more entertaining, but I agree, it definitely plays to the favor of someone who has 3 or 4 different, not weird, but just less traditional activities that they pursue, or things to share about their background, whether they're involved in dog rescue or cycling or, whatever it might be, just things that, not everyone does or whatever. Yeah. So running Ironman, or, there are all kinds of things that people often will highlight in these creative extra sort of pieces. But I agree, they can be really daunting. And I think sometimes I wonder whether these were like literally created to make it a little bit harder for the kind of engineering programmer types who are applying to school, who only think in bullet points and PowerPoint or coding, and have a harder time expressing something a little more creative. Yeah. So that's why they're there, I think. And I do think it keeps the admissions reader's job a bit more spicy, shall we say. But yeah, so these are obviously popular questions, come in all shapes and sizes. We've talked about career goals in an earlier lesson, and as you said, accomplishments and failures. And here we've got a handful more that we've tackled. Yeah. But obviously, very important to be ready for these types of questions as they come your way. The next lesson in the Admissions Academy is going to be our first about letters of recommendation.